Okay. Hi, everybody. So we're back. Darrell, Dana, Diamond Dave. How are you, Diamond Dave?
I'm going. I'm good, Dana. How you doing today?
I'm good.
Okay.
All right. So, I sent you an article last week, and I was like, this would be a great topic to talk about. And I kind of just started doing my homework at the last minute on it. But this is going to be a two-part. This and it has to be a two-part. We can't cram this in just one, setting here.
Okay.
And we're going to focus on the Black Migration 2.0. That's what I'm calling it, the Black Migration. In part two, I want to go back into time and talk about the Great Migration that took place, especially with Black folks, right?
Okay.
Here in America. But I want to focus on today, the present time. And the reason why I came across this article here. Let me scroll up. Why are Black families leaving New York and what it means for the city? Black children, in particular, are disappearing from the city, and many families point to one reason: raising children here has become too expensive. That's the main reason. It's very expensive today to raise children. That is a fact, no matter where you live at in America, right? But in the Northeast, New York City is tri-state area where I was born and raised. I'm from East Orange, New Jersey. That's part of the tri-state area. You go over the Hudson, it's New York City and all the five boroughs. Prices, just going over the water through the tunnels or over the bridge, prices jump two times as much.
Okay.
It's a difference, just literally over one part of the river to another, prices changes drastically, right? So, a lot of New Yorkers, and I'm not just talking about New York people living in New York City, but we're specifically talking about Black families, and we're talking about the different boroughs around New York. Manhattan is one of them, but then you have the Bronx, you have Brooklyn, you have Queens, you have Staten Island, you have Long Island. They're leaving because it's too expensive and the quality of life is better, and they're moving to the South. Um, so this article starts off with a family, mother and father and children. What's her name? Athena?
Yeah, Athena. Is it
Athena.
Athenia?
Yeah,
Athenia?
Athenia. Athenia Rodney is a product of an upward mobility New York City once promised Black Americans. She grew up in a mostly Black neighborhoods in Brooklyn, graduated from public schools, and attended a liberal arts college on a full scholarship. She went on to start her own event planning business in the city. But as Mrs. Rodney's own family grew, she found out living in a cramped one-bedroom rental where her three children shared a bunk bed in the living room, it was hard to get them into programs that expose them to green spaces or swimming classes. As she scrolled through friends and social media posting, showing off trampolines and spacious backyards in Georgia, the solution became clearer: leave. So, this article came out this year, and so they left Brooklyn last summer. They bought a 5-bedroom home in Snellville, Georgia.
Yeah, I know what that's at.
I felt like it became increasingly difficult to raise a family in New York City. Duh, yeah, it is. It really is. The Rodneys are part of an exodus of Black residents from New York City from 2010 to 2020, a decade during which the city's population showed a surprising increase led by a surge in Asians and Hispanic residents. The number of Black residents decreased. The decline mirrored a national trend of younger Black professionals, middle class families, and retirees leaving cities in the Northeast to and Midwest, Northeast and Midwest for the South, right? They're headed to the South. So, what are your thoughts on that? Because you are in the South, but were you raised in the South?
Yeah, I'm a Southerner.
Oh, you are a Southerner.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Out of Georgia?
Out of Florida.
Florida. That's where you did mention that before. So, okay, so you're not from the Northeast.
Yeah, definitely.
Excuse me.
Definitely.
Have you visited the Northeast?
Farthest north I've been is probably DC.
Oh, that's a little bit country, but
Yeah, I feel you. So it depends on who you talk to.
so you don't have no family in New York or the surrounding in New Jersey?
I got my grandmother had family in Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
but most of my family is from that's not in the South. It's from Chicago. They from the West Coast.
Okay,
Yeah,
so Chicago, Midwest, they're leaving too for the South.
yeah.
So you have Northeast and Midwest leaving to come to the South, right? Um, you look like you're from New York, though. Even like your
So I
mannerisms and you talk, like I would easily have thought you were from New Jersey, New York area.
okay. I don't know how I
I'm
look
I
like I'm
just
from New York.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I mean, you're mature and everything, but like you're not the younger generation up there from like
Yeah,
my generation from the Northeast. I don't know.
yeah.
I thought you migrated to the South, but
No, ma'am.
like everybody else. So, are you seeing a migration of Black people from the Northeast coming there?
Yeah, I mean, so you know that when I was in Florida, right during the pandemic, pretty
Mhm.
much the whole state of New York tried to come to Florida.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so,
especially the white people. They were the first ones, honey.
yes. So you can really tell, especially like I was in the Orlando area, they
Mhm.
started coming down really, really hard because they were trying to get out of New York because of a lot of the pandemic restrictions.
Right.
So we didn't have those restrictions in Florida, so they were all coming down. But see, so this is something I get because I was raised around a lot of West Indians.
Mhm.
And that might be where you get maybe the kind of the New York vibe. They leave the islands, they go to New York because they got family up there.
Mhm.
And they get up there and realize they don't like it. It's too cold, it's too crowded, the cost of living is extremely high. And then they come back down to Florida because it's warmer and you're still close to the islands.
Right.
So a lot of times you would see that migration. Where I'm at, I think Puerto Rico, New York, and Poinciana is in Florida. It's really in Orlando.
Okay.
That's the third highest group of Puerto Ricans in the whole country.
Okay.
And so they do the same pattern. They go from Puerto Rico, go to New York, realize they don't like it. Then they move down to Poinciana because, you know, you can go from United States to Puerto Rico without a passport. So you're still close. You ain't got to worry about a passport.
Mhm.
But you don't have to worry about a lot of the lack of infrastructure in Puerto Rico. No disrespect to Puerto Ricans.
Right.
So I've seen a lot of that as I'm growing up where, like you said, a lot of people realize that it's very expensive to live in New York
Mhm.
and you can get way more living down south. But I think as I've gotten older, I realized that New York taxes you. There's a premium for having everything that you have in New York. And that comes out of what it costs to live there, but you have everything at your fingertips.
True.
But you got to pay for that. But you do have it where if you move down south, you don't have everything at your fingertips, but the cost of living is a lot less.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Because not only do you have everything at your fingertips, there's 24 hours at your
Exactly. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. So like I come up when I was coming up in Orlando, on Sundays, you couldn't get anything done because everything was closed. Clubs, they started making it to what clubs close at 2:00 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you can go to Miami and club at 6:00, but you know, New York, they not even leaving the club till 6, 7:00 in the morning.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's a different environment that you got to pay for. There's a premium to it where you got to realize this is what I'm paying for. And I just really, in my opinion, I would always figure people would age out of it. But I guess once you get used to it, it just becomes your lifestyle.
Because there's always something to do.
Yes, ma'am.
You think you're going to miss something, a whole lot of events, a lot of culture with the arts. Queens is one of the most diverse cities in this country.
Okay.
Any country in the world, you could find it in Queens, foods or whatever. So it is a richness. It's a lot of perks. There are a lot of perks, but it does, like you said, it does come at a cost.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the way it is. You know, anywhere you go, LA, anything you want in the world, you could find it in LA.
Definitely.
It comes at a cost,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
But at one point, especially in Queens, I don't know if you ever saw the documentary, The Supreme Team.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Queens, they have a very strong Black population, Black families, Black business, Black politicians booming. So it was a time in the boroughs, Harlem, the history of Harlem with Black people, you know?
Yeah.
It was a time in Manhattan, in New York, you know, throughout the boroughs, Black people were flourishing. And that's going to be on a part 2 of this Black migration. But then when you bring in the crack era, that basically wiped out any type of wealth and brought in a lot of crime and so forth, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So now we have this migration. I want to bring up the chart. So, okay, one of the main reason is too expensive, and it's the quality of life. So it's 2 reasons: too expensive and better quality of life in the South. Too expensive to where, okay, In Manhattan, the median income $62,000. The median rent is $1,500. This must be old, honey. Oh, this was back in 2019. That's why.
Okay.
2019 median income 62. Median rent was $1,500. In Brooklyn, median income $40K. Rent $1,250. Queens $46K. Rent $1,400 a month. Staten Island $46K median income. Rent $1,200. Right. This was in 2019.
Yeah, that's a long time ago.
Long time ago, right?
Yeah.
COVID hit the next day, shut everything down. A lot of people lost their jobs. Majority of people lost their jobs. Unemployment. Yeah, you got the 600 a week for 3 months. You got the unemployment, but your job wasn't coming back. And if your job did come back, it was paying you less money.
Yeah.
And the rent the rent went up by 40%.
Mm-hmm.
All over the boroughs. White people couldn't afford it. And we know the difference of the family wealth ratio with Black and white families. So it's too expensive to live in New York. So let's just look at, I pulled up some graphs that I want to share.
Yes, ma'am. And it's cold.
I mean, you know what? I think I'm used to it because
Yeah, I feel you.
Right now I'm in Ohio. I don't wear a coat as long as I have a scarf. This cold out here, this is cold, but
Okay.
I'm driving, so I'm in and out of car. I'm not doing all that busing and stuff. But okay, so population by race. Between 2010 and 2020, white people made up 33%. And then in 2020, 30%, right? So it was a little of a decrease. Black people in 2010 was 22, and it decreased by 2020 to 20%. So that's minus 0.4%. Asians increased. It was 12% in 2010, 15% in 2020. So they had a 33.6% increase. Some other races increased by, it'll be 84, so 1.1 to 1.6. 2 or more races, 1.8 to 3.4, so that's 181%. Hispanics, 28.6, 28.3 by 2020. So it's just a 6.6% change. They didn't really change too much. So if you see here, Black people are at a decrease within a decade, 4.5% decrease out of New York City. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I just, like you said, I think it's cost of living. We know about the gentrification in New York City, especially in the boroughs. I've had a lot of New Yorkers talk to me about that. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, because the city already historically is known to be expensive. A lot of Black people were living there, and I wouldn't say that they were doing extremely well, but they were able to maintain themselves. But we see that once things started to go up, they started feeling like, okay, I'm getting pushed out, and there may not be the opportunity here that I thought was here. It may be time to go to somewhere else, because we know that with a lot of Black New Yorkers, they did eventually come from down south of, initially. So they came up. So then now it's just time to move back down. And I kind of think that makes sense, because if you don't feel like I can never have anything living in New York, it may just not be worth it, even though you got everything at your fingertips. Because this is something that we witnessed. When I was coming up, New York got all the fashion first. Mm-hmm. They got all the clothes first. They got all the music first, because it was New York City. They're one of the capitals of the whole world, right? Because of the internet, that's no longer the case. So a lot of the advantages that you would get from living in New York, from a style reason, from an aesthetic reason, from an entertainment reason, they no longer exist anymore. So you see with a lot of the younger New Yorkers that are like under 25 years old, they're totally different, because they get all their stuff offline. Mm-hmm. And they don't get their stuff because they live in New York. Or when I was coming up, you would meet New Yorkers and they would have shoes and clothes you had never seen before, because everything would hit New York first and then go to get every other part of the country. So now, what advantage do you really have in living in New York? To me, only reason I would live in New York is if I worked in fashion or if I worked in finance. If I didn't work in those two industries, I wouldn't live in New York.
Or maybe tech. They do have a
maybe tech. Yes, ma'am. But same thing with tech is that a lot of the work can be done online. So if the network is there, I would, but a lot of the actual working, I could just do via the net.
Right.
Yes, ma'am. So if I worked in finance, I definitely would live in New York.
Well, okay, take this chart for instance. So just looking at the population now, in Manhattan, 46.8%, that green area, that's white people. So
Okay.
Black people rarely, it was always a smaller percentage when you talk about Manhattan, right? And that would include Harlem. Harlem is part of Manhattan.
Okay.
Brooklyn, white people, this is the white people here, more than Black people. So this is 2020.
Yeah.
It wasn't always like that because there were more Black people in Harlem. Brooklyn, there was a good population, a strong population of people in Brooklyn. But you talk about gentrification, and
Yeah.
the average brownstone is over $3 million in Brooklyn. And who could afford it? White people. Who can
Yeah.
afford Manhattan? Majority of white people. The Bronx. Who was this in the purple? That must be Hispanics. Yeah, Hispanics. Of course, the Bronx dominated by Hispanics. A little bit of white, and second, is Black, right? This is all in, what's this, 2020. And Queens, 15.9%. What is Asians? Right, that's that one. Asians are dominating in Queens, and they do have Chinatown in Queens.
In Queens, yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the Hispanics. Okay, so the Hispanics, and you're talking about not just Puerto Ricans or Dominicans, a lot of South Americans, Colombians, so forth, is in Queens. And then you have Asians, not just Chinese, but you have Koreans, Vietnamese. So, but Black people in Queens has dropped because it's only 15%. And this, I'm pretty sure you're including the Caribbean.
Yeah.
White people, 22. Staten Island's always been majority white because you're talking about Italians or whatever.
Yeah. They all left the Bronx.
Right.
Yeah.
Came to Staten Island.
Exactly.
Staten Island is Republican too.
Yeah. They left the Bronx and went to Staten.
Right. Then you have the Hispanics, then the Asians, and then 9.4%. But Black people always been a low percentage there in the Bronx. So I have a couple other charts. So the thing is, so it's like, it's too expensive and quality of life. Black people income is not increasing. We'll talk about that in another show that I do want to talk about, why, right? Why we're not in the industries that are paying more money. So it said in the article, New York is losing Black residents, but the South is gaining them, which means you're gaining an economic boom. So I put one person loss is another person treasure. New York loss of the Black residents is a boom in Southern economy. What do you think of that?
I think it is, but the question that you talked about before is that, so this is what I wanted to ask because I've never lived in New York. Were the Black people living in New York, were they doing well or were they just barely making it?
Barely making it.
So that's what I'm saying is that what is going to change when you go down south if you haven't really increased your skill set? And I think that's what I want a lot of people to understand when you moving from city to city is that if you don't really increase your skills as you move, what's really going to change? So it could be, it's less expensive to live down south, but what's going to be your quality of life if you haven't really put yourself from a skill standpoint to where you can start bringing in more income? Because we're seeing now that the South, the cost of living is going up because everybody's running down here.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a big increase.
Yeah. Especially in Florida.
Yeah. So metro areas where Black share decreased since 1990. You have Richmond, of course, you had to see DC, Detroit, but significantly Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And then metro areas where Black share increased since 1990, Memphis, Judge Joe Brown running for mayor of Memphis.
Yep.
Right now at a 46% rate, right? People flock to Memphis, and right now Memphis Black population is 65%. Black mayor, Black chief of police, Black everything. And it's a high crime. Atlanta, of course, 33%. Atlanta was the mecca, especially in the 90s, 80s, and 90s. And then, even to now, people from the North coming to the South. Columbus, Ohio, see an increase. Minneapolis. The reason why I'm showing this, right? When you look at these cities, Minneapolis, Columbus, Atlanta, Memphis, these are high crime areas. George Floyd, Minneapolis, Columbus, Ohio. There were some police shootings of unarmed Black men, killings. Atlanta, we all know Atlanta and Memphis. One of the things, though, I'm curious, I would say, yes, it does bring an economic boom to the South, but a lot of people from the North do bring that Northern behavior. And do you see an increase in crime with more people from the North coming to the South?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to give New Yorkers a bad name.
That's okay.
Okay, so but the thing is that it kind of depends on how your city's set up. So like I'm from Orlando, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm from West Orlando. There were no New Yorkers living by us because they couldn't function with us. So we didn't really see an increase in crime because they didn't live around us. They lived on the east side of the city. So I guess it depends on how they integrate with the people
Mm-hmm.
and then who they are before they come down to the South. Because, like we said, is that New Yorkers a lot of times are programmed to think that they're way ahead of everybody
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of like the New York mentality. But then when, you come to Florida and, we can get an AR-15 out at Walmart, you realize that you're really not moving at a speed that we're not already at. And so I think that the crime isn't necessarily coming from them. I think there's already crime there. But if you're not coming down with skill sets, then you get caught up in the criminal activity that's already going on in these cities.
Right.
Same thing if you go to Memphis. You can ride around Memphis with guns everywhere. So I don't really think they're bringing issues in Memphis. I think Memphis has issues and then they're going there and they're getting caught up with what's already going on in that city.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Another factor is because when you brought up income, where it says young Black families say that trajectory has become more elusive, high inflation and a turbulent rental market as the pandemic has subsided have hurt New Yorkers across the board, which is true. But Black families lag far behind white families in home ownership and in building wealth. Black families have a median income of $53,000 compared with roughly $98,000 for white households. So it goes to the income, right? So yes, it's expensive. It's more expensive after COVID for everybody. But if you were already living paycheck to paycheck, which many Black families were, and then now that prices with inflation and rental prices increased by a 40% increase, and you were never a homeowner, right? Because being a homeowner brings you wealth, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
It does go back to the economics of it. So, what are your thoughts? And honest, do you think it's a good thing that a Black family is able to just get up and leave to come to the South for a better quality of life for their children?
Yeah, definitely I do. I think because one of the things I witnessed, and like I said, I've never been to New York, but I've been to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And they're very similar to what cost of living impacts your lifestyle. And one thing I noticed with a lot of people in LA is that they're just lifetime renters. Because of how much things are, you're never going to be able to purchase property. So you just rent, so you never get control of that particular asset. So that's wealth building that's being taken away from your family. That was a normal New York lifestyle for a very long period of time. But they had things in New York that we don't have down south, like rent control. Mm-hmm. So you just rent. But the problem is that you're never able to build the wealth because you can never get the equity out of what you're renting. I think a lot of people have woken up to where, that may not necessarily be a great scenario for me. I can move down south, get some property, try to figure out how I'm gonna make my life work, and also have my kids raised in a better environment. Because also when you're looking at really dense cities like New York, you have a lot of health implications that impact children, like childhood asthma, things of that nature, lead in buildings and things of that nature because of how dense they are.
Right.
So I think we were forced up north because of a lot of situations down south.
Right.
We're seeing now that people are being forced down south because of situations up north.
And it's like that reverse discrimination or segregation, because New York is very segregated.
Yeah, definitely.
Solutions, right? Because again, like I said, this is part one, to where part two, we're going to just dive a little bit deeper into specifics as to why Black families and Black people are lagging. Like, what are the reasons, and bringing a historical standpoint to it. But economics, right? There is a problem with not earning enough, not being homeowners. But what do you think about working together and community survival? Because you see, and we showed the charts, we see the decrease of the Black population throughout all the 5 boroughs, but you see an increase in Asians. Hispanics are staying the same and increasing in certain boroughs. Of course, white people ain't going nowhere because, yes, they flocked to Florida, but they already had their home in New York.
Exactly.
They bought and they went to their summer homes in Florida.
Exactly.
So
They
they bounce back
snowbirds.
and forth. Yeah. But
Exactly.
their residency is in New York. It's only Black people. Do you think one of the reasons why is because we don't work together as a community opposed to other groups?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in like you talked about before with the crack era. So you already have a bunch of people that don't work together. They get hurt by crack cocaine. They get hurt by mass incarceration. So they're even more damaged and they still don't work together. So then when you get faced with any kind of economic downturn, you don't have any support system. So everybody's just on their own. And so, like I said before, is that because we won't really lock into what we're going to work with other people to try to do to become successful, to become competitive. Because one thing I know about New York, it's a very much a competitive environment.
Yes.
So if you just by yourself and you competing with a whole nother ethnic group and they 3, 4, 500, few thousand people, there's no way in the world you could beat them.
Right.
And that's something that we constantly run ourselves into. And we have not gotten the memo yet that, they're moving to these places like New York as a group. We talked about the Chinatown and Queens. So they're moving as a group to make sure they group wins. And we oftentimes are moving as individuals. Right. And you can't beat a group of people as one person.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's a great point, because in this article, they highlighted a woman, she was living in a shelter with her children, rat infested shelter, because she couldn't afford an apartment, and she was able to get in a program that they offered for her. And as it says, in late 2019, Miss Horry moved to Jersey City. That's right over the Hudson River from Manhattan, the lower part of Manhattan, the financial district where the Twin Towers used to be, or whatever, where One Trade Center is. You go right over the water, that's Jersey City. And she was able to get in a special program called Special One-Time Assistance Program, which relocates vulnerable families into permanent housing with a full year's rent up front. Yeah. So moving just over the river dropped her living costs drastically, and she's no longer needs food stamps or welfare or rental assistance. Her rent is $1,650 a month for a 2-bedroom. She works full time, but it's just her. She's a single parent, again, operating as an individual, right? Had it have been more of a community family situation, even if she would have moved, you could have moved into a bigger house because you have your man there, or the community would have been built around like an ecosystem of affordable rental apartments, jobs. You did a show about the Jewish community. Yeah. I think that's one of the best shows.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, but you broke down the ecosystem that they built.
Yeah, they definitely have one. But like I said, is that and this is something that we one day got to get into. If I believe the only way I'm going to survive in New York City is if I work with my group, then I work with my group. If I believe I can survive in New York City just doing it all by myself, and I think that's how I'm going to get my props and that's how I'm going to get my stripes, is showing how I did it dolo, that's what I'm going to go do. And so I just think we got to really get into how we think about what success looks like, because I think a lot of them have bought into that success looks like I did it all by myself. And other people, success looks like I did it with my group. And so if I say I did it with my group and nobody celebrates it, but then if I can say, well, I did it all by myself and everybody talks about me like I'm the best thing since sliced bread, I not think that's what I need to go do.
I can tell you right now, outside of Black people, every other group, they are not operating as an individual.
Yeah, definitely.
White men are not operating as an individual, right? Jewish people, it's a strong Jewish community in Upper West Side.
Okay.
And a little bit on the East. Some people want to say the West Side is new money, but they created an ecosystem there. So those apartments that will cost a lot of money, why is it a whole? It's a big Jewish community because they rent those apartments out to their own. It's a system. They just created a
Yes,
system,
ma'am.
So nobody in New York works as an individual except for Black people now.
Exactly. And you
And
just had to get knocked off.
right,
So you just
and
had to get knocked off.
which is causing the new Black migration 2.0. Is so, and what I'm just going to leave it here and close out. Leaving New York because you can't afford it, right?
Mhm.
But now you're talking about as an individual, being a Black person, you're operating as an individual, going to the South. You're still operating as an individual.
Exactly.
So it's going to be a point to where we're just going to be asked out across this nation. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. If you have that mentality in New York and then you bring it down south and nothing about you changes, you're going to just end up in the same scenario where you're going to get isolated, you're going to be vulnerable, because they're going to do the same thing to you down south that they was doing to you up north. So one of the reasons why they wanted Black people in New York at one time is because they wanted that cheap labor. When they no longer needed that cheap labor, then you just got to figure it out. And then because everybody's an individual, they just are able to continue to attack you with drugs, incarceration, yada, yada, yada. And there's nothing you can do about it. So if, like I said, you bring that same mentality down south, it's just going to be a repeat, just going to be with more land, more fresh air, but you're going to just get a repeat of that same TV show.
Right, exactly. So, all right. So, I mean, this is very informative. Like I said, this is part one. Part two, I want to be a little bit more specific, because I just wanted to throw the numbers of percentage of the change that is happening in the boroughs throughout Manhattan, and 19% of Black children fell. It fell 19% between 2010 to 2020, and that's a lot. So, But thank you, Diamond Dave.
Appreciate it.
You know what? I meant to tell you, give me a new banner because the website should be bigger.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, will do.
But tell people where they can find you. Your channel at Diamond Dave on YouTube, and your website here, highestpaid.online.
Okay, so www.thehighestpaid.online. So it's for three groups of people inside our society, right? You're working 9 to 5. You don't like the money that you're making. You don't like the fact that you got to take a lot of time away from your family. And you don't like the fact that there's a cap on your income, even though like eggs is like $10 a dozen now. So what we figured out how to do is solve a lot of those problems that are very much income related or income insecurity related by teaching people how to leverage the options market. We've been very successful in doing this. However, it's not going to be an overnight situation. You got to be willing to put the work in. And everybody that watches this video, by the time you see this, we should be having like I would say a February sale. It's going to be the lowest price we're probably going to do all year on our core course. So I want to encourage you to go ahead and tap into that. My YouTube channel is at Diamond Dave 1 or just at Diamond Dave. You could probably get more information there. But I want to really encourage you to move forward, because after the month of February is over, the price is going to go back up in regards to the market that I'm serving.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you guys soon.
All right.
Dana with the data. Dana with the data.